Shannon and Rachel here. So the start of this particular topic is around the changes that have taken place this past year, which showed a void in our industry. We saw a monumental shift in how manufacturing is handled in the garment industry throughout the U.S. With the COVID shutdown, and so what that has highlighted is the shortage or the changes that took place over the last I'm going to say, Shannon, probably 15, 20, 25 years, because this didn't happen overnight. We've had a tremendous shift in capability and capacity that has exited the U.S. and it's gone all over the world in terms of different countries and different regions for various types of products. So with that, that has had a significant impact on not only the people that's in our industry, the environment, the creative process, and really the business models that we see within the apparel industry in the U.S. So that prompted the question with the PPE shortages that were witnessed about what would it take for us to reshore or establish a new generation of manufacturing capabilities in our industry. And this is where Shannon and Rachel come into the conversation here. So Shannon, why don't while we're waiting for Rachel, it looks like we've got Rachel who's just going to be coming on screen here. So with that, we will have both co-founders here of the Skilled Labor Brigade, and so we'll give Rachel another second here. But since Shannon's already on, why don't we?
I'm on. It's just it won't let me show my video. Sorry, it's saying unable to show video. Can I get a permission to do that? I think I need a permission.
I think Britta's working on that right now.
It's coming. You should have. See if that. I gave you host permission.
Yep, there we go. Here I am.
Hey, success.
All right, Rachel. Welcome. Hey, so I hope you were able to. That's fantastic. I hope you were able to hear a little bit of the conversation that we had just started. So while you're getting set up, Rachel, Shannon, why don't I hand this off to you as one of the co-founders for a little introduction, and Rachel will do the same for you, and then we'll go into what Skilled Labor Brigade is all about.
Sure. Hi, I'm Shannon O'Hara. As you said, I'm one of the co-founders of Skilled Labor Brigade. I've been an actual garment worker in the fashion industry for the last 20 plus years. I'm a high-end custom tailor. I've worked with a lot of the biggest designers and celebrities in the industry, and Rachel and I have known each other for a long time. Socially, we've been friends, and we're always talking about, just talking about the issues that interest us in the fashion industry. I'm extremely interested in labor, and she's extremely interested in more of the circularity and sustainability side. And, we saw around when everything shut down in the beginning of the pandemic, that all these garment workers were scrambling to see how they could offer to be of service to New York State to help with the shortages of PPE. So just being such, both of us having such long histories in the fashion industry, we were connected to so many different people. We just started organizing them. And we put together, over 500 different garment workers, and also including different factory owners. And we started, in hopes that we could heed the call to make, help with this large need. And then we also realized during this push that we were seeing, aside from PPE, a lot of designers coming to us saying that they were having difficulties getting their product into the country, and also just expressing a desire to make their products in America. And we started to notice that there was just such an interest now, more so than we've seen in a long time, to reshore manufacturing to to the United States. And of course, you know, I'll let Rachel take it from here, but of course, you know, one of the driving forces behind having your manufacturing closer to you was so that you could keep your eye more closely tuned on to the sustainability issues that we've run into. And, you know, this is something that Rachel's really good at addressing. So I'm going to hand the mic to her and let her take it over.
Sure. So, Rachel Kibbe, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I have a decade of experience specifically in sustainability in the fashion industry. In the last 3 years, I've focused on textile waste and managing large-scale textile waste, both the collection of it and where it goes from there in terms of resale, downcycling, upcycling, fiber to fiber and advanced recycling. I've sort of had my head down in that. And when Shannon and I sort of came together almost informally just to solve this problem of making PPE locally, you know, I was sort of like, well, you know, I really don't want to, I never wanted to produce anything ever again. I never wanted to produce new garments because I thought that there was so much need for focus and thought process around end user and end of life extension and recycling. But as we came together to just focus on this national security issue and this pressing need for new things, basically, whether they were made of used or old materials or not, and started to make PPE together, a large part of the conversation is like, how do we do this sustainably? What types of materials are we going to use? How do we get a hold of recycled cotton? How do we get a hold of dead stock materials? How do we get a hold of post-consumer materials that we can use to make masks? And it's the conversation in the business sort of started to evolve because we realized there's such a need for thought process around end life of a product at the beginning stages of the design process, which a lot of designers know and are working in that space. But that's sort of where I kind of came around to understanding how my particular sort of expertise could help production.
Hey, and so with that begins the backstory of Skilled Labor Brigade. So how about if we jump towards with the introductions covered here? How about if we do cover a little more about the concept behind Skilled Labor Brigade? See, I keep wanting to make you guys a government agency and call you a Skilled Labor Bureau.
Yep.
We've had this conversation before,
which we like. We kind of like.
Why don't we just say SLB?
That's right.
SLB.
That's right. So we'll do that. Now, in our earlier conversation, when we were preparing for this, both of you shared a very interesting perspective in terms of putting the workers first. You know, so if maybe we can touch on that topic and lead into some of the other things about how putting workers first affects some of the manufacturing elements and some of the skills that you're trying to build for the workforce.
Well, one thing I would say is that, you know, one of the things that that my background being, you know, I have organized large teams of tailors and seamstresses and garment makers for projects for different, you know, designers for the last 20 years, all over the country, actually all over the world. And one of the stories that we hear a lot about why manufacturing, garment apparel manufacturing left the United States is because of the lack of skill, the lack of skilled people. And I, having traveled the country and put together these teams, I was like, that's not true. I don't believe that. I'm working with these extremely talented, extremely skilled people. And like Rachel said, you know, if we can begin in the beginning, you know, and put together the most skilled people with the sustainability design process, then, you know, it should be a little bit easier to make things in America and answer some of the problems that most designers seem to be having, especially in the beginning phase.
And one of the parts that's unique about the way we're working, I think we sort of talked about like our overarching sort of mission But one of the interesting, out of necessity, we basically have put together a skilled work network of people, both from home studios and factories, and sort of linked them together in a very unique workflow process. That's how we started making masks, cutting in factories, delivering to people who had skilled apparel workers who had home studios and couldn't necessarily work from home, work in the factory at that point because of capacity or whatever, personal reasons or mandate at that point. So we realized that this is sort of a very unique process to be able to scale even larger volumes of production by connecting, even though there are very skilled apparel workers here, there certainly aren't the quantities of skilled apparel workers that there are now in other countries. But we do have networks that we can loop together through this sort of like interesting way that we had to work out the necessity.
So Rachel and Shannon, with what you just said in terms of there's a network element, and then there's a technical skills element to this, right? In terms of both of you mentioned different facets of that in terms of the capability might be there, but the connectivity or the structure of organizing them isn't there. Or at least that's lacking because there's no comprehensive large scale corporate entity that's employing everybody in one location or under one organization. Could you give a little perspective on that in terms of what it's been like to try to build that network where you could then allocate work to this, I guess what I'll say is very remote or pods of people where they might be able to work individually or within their own network? If you could share a little perspective on what that's been like, that would be great.
Well, I think that it would be very hard to speak on the permanence of that, but right now I know that, it hasn't been hard, but there's also a huge problem with a lot of designers having canceled contracts with factories. So, I'm in New York where there's millions and millions of people that are on unemployment right now. So it hasn't been, aside from, yes, it's been difficult organizing them, and we've come up with some proprietary technology to help, make that a little smoother on the, organizing side of things. But as far as like putting everything together, it's been a little easy because right now, people are struggling and factories are struggling. I mean, I go into these factories every day and there's not that many people in them, and there's racks and racks of clothes from designers who aren't paying, and there's an absolute, I'm going to speak to Rachel. She and I were discussing earlier about some of the business opportunities that are going on with, it's been so difficult with tariffs and supply chain problems that we found it easier to find labor. That's been one thing that we've been able to do, and we're hoping that by building this we can kind of come up with an infrastructure to answer the call when the economy does ramp back up and designers are ready to go. But we've seen so many layoffs in retail. I do think that the environment is becoming better for smaller companies. I mean, the designers that aren't the giant Gap, Zara, those people, because there's been a lot more move towards designing and selling direct to customer. So, that kind of structure doesn't want to manufacture necessarily overseas. They want a quicker turnaround. They want a quicker, they want smaller numbers, and I mean, we tend to, we'll go like as small as maybe 300, 500 units per style. But, you wouldn't be able to entertain that overseas. But right now, like I said earlier, designers are having a hard time even bringing the fabric in. So we've been setting up networks within the United States of different mills and fabric suppliers. Rachel and I have gotten really involved in the hemp industry. You know, so that's how.
Okay, so with that, we'll share in the chat and also in the sponsor exhibit section of the WOVA app links to the Skilled Labor Brigade and some of the information that you've already posted to your website. So we'll direct some folks there for some additional info on what you just said right there about the network and how that might look to others that may want to get involved. So, hey, let me direct this half of the question to Rachel in terms of, with this network that's expanding, in terms of remote work, if you will. I'll use that term because I think everyone's heard that right now in terms of a dispersed workforce, because that's effectively what we're describing here. What do you think, if you can maybe give a perspective on trying to manage that from the standpoint of now we're sending, I'll just use a hypothetical here. If we're going to have them have this workforce produce something, now we're sending material and components out to these remote locations versus having it all consolidated in one. Some thoughts around, how is the remote workforce different for sustainable manufacturing relative to the traditional model of a large-scale factory that you might see it, in various production countries across the world? What's your thought there in terms of, spread out remote versus centralized manufacturing for sustainability?
I mean, I think that it's important to frame the question when you say like centralized manufacturing, in terms of large scale manufacturing, in the East, it's not really centralized. Like oftentimes, like if you have organic, it's growing here in the United States and it's spun maybe in India, and then the textile is woven in China, and then it's, the button is manufactured in Vietnam. And I mean, it's a sprawling global supply chain. And so if we have to send an item from a factory or a household in the Bronx to be finished in Manhattan, that's not a sprawling global supply chain to me, and because we start at the very beginning of the design process, like Shannon said, we're deeply involved in hemp and hemp textiles, and specifically American grown hemp, and it's a very nascent industry, but like we're starting with the sourcing, and we're doing as much as we can to help designers source materials that are specifically American grown if possible, but at least made. So in terms of textiles and trims and that sort of thing. So I mean, I think it's all relative. It's just different. And the more that you can keep production domestic, the less sprawling that supply chain is. It's just it's a different way of working, and you can have much more control over it. Like in terms of sustainability and circularity, we take ownership of the product we make, basically, meaning that we help designers design for repair. We'll take things back for repair. We'll take things back for recycling. We'll take things back for resale. We own the supply chain in a circular way, starting at manufacturing. So it's just a different way of working. And in my mind, and for as long as I've worked in sustainability and circularity in the fashion industry, all roads lead to, you need more nimble supply chains that are localized and have the capability to collect in a local fashion, like meaning get the items back and keep them in circulation in a local fashion. Because if let's say you're going to recycle a garment, it doesn't make sense that you're sending it to China for the fibers to be recycled or upcycled. It should be done here, or it should be done wherever that product was manufactured and sold. That's a perfect world. I mean, like we're trying to design a system that enables circularity, basically, from the ground up.
So that's a great perspective to share with our audience here, because the point that I really tune into what you've just said is you're designing for this. You're thinking of this from the start. This is a concept that I think those of us that have been working around the topic of how do we make our industry more sustainable, we've been talking about a industry shift in terms of how decisions are made. So in terms of changing to having from the concept phase, some sort of a end of life or a re-life process built into that product creation process. So along that same topic line, why don't I ask for your thoughts on the new job skills that are necessary to be able to start working in this environment of designing for sustainability or designing through sustainable processes, talking about the skills that are needed, and then also how that might, have some impact in terms of some job losses, in terms of you can't work the way we did 20 or 30 years ago and expect that to continue. So how do you see this pivot taking place?
I think that's a great question, and it's sort of on a lot of people's minds is job loss in every industry or most industries, or people are really understanding what that means on more deeply personal levels across classes. I think we need to keep in mind that manufacturing job loss in the United States specifically has been happening for a century. And although our cheap products have come at a cost, and the cost is at our labor force. And so, there's entirely old industries to bring back here, like spinning and weaving mills that use the same equipment that they did 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but there's also new job creation to be had here. I also want to sort of flag that and go back to there are a lot of people abroad who have also lost their jobs in the apparel manufacturing industry, and I don't want to downplay the importance of that, but the fact is that supply chain is not working anymore. People are canceling their orders on them. They're out of the borders are shut down, and so product is held up. It's just like that supply chain is just sort of breaking down for many reasons. And so I don't think the answer is to fix something that was broken. I think it's to create something that works better. And people are going to be impacted. They are impacted right now because that system is sort of broken. And I don't think it's about redesigning our way back into fixing that broken system, like I said. But, I think that there's so many jobs to be had here and in every country in terms of circular supply chains. There are repair jobs to be had. There are resale jobs to be had. There are recycling jobs to be had, which include many layers, including collection, sortation, remanufacturing, spinning, processing. And it's not just in the United States, but this can be domestically all over the world. And we just have to reimagine it. And I think there will be more jobs than ever if we can get there for every country.
And so on that part, that's a great perspective in terms of not only the global impact but the regional impact of what you're describing. And what you just said about there's other skills and expertise that are needed in terms of making this happen. So in terms of some of those support industries, we've seen this occur time and time again. In terms of if we look at the last 100 years, there was a automotive center in terms of around Detroit and sort of the Great Lakes area where the automotive industries headquartered themselves, and then all of the support industries that provide components and technology to those companies all sort of clustered there. Now we see some of the similar things with technologies companies along the West Coast and the Bay Area, different places, the financial center in New York. So do you see if for something like that to emerge where we can rebuild some of those skills and related support industry expertise, do you see that emerging and starting to take a foothold somewhere?
There already are. It's cottage industry. Like you look at Renewal Workshop, who does repairs of mainly overstock and returns, I believe. Patagonia has its own sort of repair and collection service and resale service. I mean, it's all very, very nascent, but there are these cottage industries that are springing up in support of keeping products in use and keeping them recycled. And all the big advanced recycling is when you take it's not happening really outside of a lab yet, but it's when you take like cotton and turn it back into a cellulosic fiber, or you take poly and turn it back into polyester fiber at equal or better strength. All of those their technologies point to regionalized systems that are going to need to take place for them to happen most efficiently. I think we're a long way off, but to seeing those technologies at scale, but we're seeing repair and resale and brands taking ownership of at least downcycling here in the United States now. And there's I work with these companies every day, and they are employing people. And it's not a matter of if, but when it really starts to become obvious to people that these are employment opportunities. We have no choice. We don't environmentally, we have no choice. Yeah.
I also think that it's something the consumer is more interested in now. I mean, consumers, there is a desire to buy more responsibly, but what does that mean? Just because a label says sustainable, these are the industries that Rachel's talking about. If we had actual, could point to actual recyclable fibers or repair, or to be able to really point out exactly, where you're getting your fabrics from, and all these things that the consumer is looking for. I think that we're at a crossroads now with the social movements that we've seen happen, where consumers are also interested in knowing that their labor is ethical. But right now it's so impossible to know, how is our stuff being made? I mean, just 2 days ago, there was a fire in India. India is supposed to be in a large cotton mill or cotton supplier, and India is supposed to be the next big manufacturer. I think the customer, when the designers definitely are ready for it, and then the designers are going to be marketing, and the customer is interested in it.
So that's covering what you said, Shannon, just now, and then Rachel, what you just commented on before that covers both sides of this, in terms of there has to be a what I'll say is the industry supply side of this, making some of these changes, to then be reacting to the consumer side that has a higher level of interest and demand for products that are handled this way. So we're seeing this emerge from both sides of this. Hey, in both of your opinions, I mean, which do you think is taking the lead? I mean, in terms of, do you think there's enough consumer demand or interest to drive an industry change on the supplier's side? Is there, what can people do to help accelerate that?
I mean, I think it's a push and a pull. It's like 5 steps forward, 2 steps back. This is, this year has been monumental in terms of, I'll just call it marketing on behalf of circularity and sustainability in the fashion industry for a lot of reasons. But it's been happening for, over a decade that we've like consumers have sort of been pushing brands in this direction. And now I don't think there's, in terms of even just environmental risk, cotton scarcity, water scarcity, all the things that the fashion supply chain really depends on. Brands understand that they're going to have to look at things and make things in a different way if they want to be able to supply customers with the things that they want at the price points they need. Because, I mean, in terms of water scarcity, there won't be enough cotton at reasonable price points when that happens. So we have to have alternatives and recycling alternatives. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I think it's both. I think that the tension here is price. Sustainability comes at a higher cost than something that is really cheaply made. One of the largest parts of that is just volume. In terms of like when we're talking about like we look a lot at hemp, and hemp per yard is fairly expensive now compared to cotton, but that's not because hemp yields a crop that makes a lot more per acre than cotton, and requires less, doesn't require pesticides, and it requires less water, and it's like it's all the things that are much cheaper than cotton to grow, but it's demand. So it's going to be a concert of consumer demand pushing up supply, and brands being able to buy it for cheaper, that will allow more and more of the consumer base to be able to access these products at cheaper prices, more affordable prices. So
one thing that I think we saw during the early months of the pandemic, when we started to realize just how messed up our supply chains were, and the severe PPE and ventilator shortages that everyone was brought the majority of Americans, and I mean actually the whole global community, they made them aware of what these systems we set up, what the result of them is, these shortages. And I, in the beginning, I was saying, I would say over and over again whenever we were talking to any news, like there's a direct connection between the nurses who were going to work in garbage bags and no PPE. There's a direct connection to their exploitation and the exploitation of the workers that we've been seeing in other parts of the world. Our choices were, to go and search out areas that we can exploit, are directly connected to seeing the exploitation that we're now seeing in our medical community. And and I think that it became very clear, at least in America, that this was happening, and that so that's where I think there is a widening knowledge in the consumer. And with the movements that we've been seeing, we've watched very powerful players be brought down through like Me Too, and all these different movements that have been coming around. And I think the next real movement is going to be bringing people down for their labor practices. And if you can and companies aren't wanting to be connected to that. You see like some of these large corporations partnering with nonprofits and all these to just kind of have we're for real good guys kind of images. And and one of the ways you can do that is just to start again having it closer to home, so we can keep a closer eye on it.
So building off of that topic here, in terms of the point you made about the shutdown and what's taken place, and just in terms of social movements this year, having just a broad range of impact on a lot of different brands and large corporations. In terms of looking at the current state of sustainable processes and brands that are building to that. Is there anybody that, some brands that you might name, some brands that you admire and that you feel are doing probably the best job at trying to put this transformation forward? If you want to maybe just share like your top 3 brands for each of you in terms of who you think is doing well, who you might consider having other companies or other businesses model themselves after because of the fact that could help build momentum, or is it something where everybody has to find their own path?
I mean, I think it's very much somebody has to find their own path. I mean, there's like, I think that there are lots of brands that are approaching sustainability. Like I talked about Patagonia, but they're not producing in the United States, and I think they should. There's, I have a hard time with the top 3 because like, that's why I said we're trying to design this in sort of a utopian manner, because to me, like there are very few brands that, I really think are doing it completely right, whether they're saying that they're working with artisans, but they do that because it's really cheap labor, like I really think we need to start making things here in the United States. Like, don't tell me a story about uplifting someone in Africa, when you're living in a community where there are people who are at the highest homeless rates in history, and you should be employing them. Like, I know why you're working with a community that you can basically underpay or pay less than American wages. You know, I'm just really disillusioned with how the fashion industry has approached production. And I think that, you know, we're working with a designer called Pashko, and they're really trying to use, we're producing their collection, and they're trying to use a community-made model. And we're guiding them towards more sustainable materials. And they understand this labor piece is like going to be the future. Like, if you're a brand and you say you're doing great, but nobody knows that you haven't employed anybody in your community, and the ones that you have, you're abusing, and it's like you're busting unions, and it's all over the New York Times, you're screwed. Like, people are over it. I think right now, this week, people are over it. Like, we've seen, people are, the buck stops here, and it's time to rethink your supply chain entirely. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room anymore. I think that brands that are, the reason I also point to Patagonia is they list what they're doing wrong. They haven't really talked a whole lot about labor, but sustainability wise, you can go to their website and you can read about what they're doing wrong. We love to see that for labor. You know what I mean? Like, I think that we also, like, one of the things Shannon and I like to ask designers when we start to consult with them and then produce for them is, why are you bringing this product into the world?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do we need this? What does it add? What's the value add to society? Because like I said at the start of the conversation, like, I do not think we need more new clothes. We could live off our supply of clothes that we have used for many, many years. But if you feel like you need a new product out there, whether it's because it employs people or because it's going to build a better vertically integrated system that takes down the players eventually who are not doing things right, you know, may the force be with you, you know. But like, it's about that thoughtfulness, because the veil has come up, you know.
So, and oh, go ahead, Shannon, please.
No, the good news is that, you know, I mean, I'm usually banging my fist on the table, screaming about labor rights issues, and you know, we do have these labor rights issues in our own country. You know, I mean, just because it's made in America doesn't necessarily mean that it's all beautifully done. You know, we saw during the pandemic when we were producing in our community made model, you know, that we founded during the pandemic, it was because we were seeing these factories where people were getting sick. You know, there was what LA Apparel had 300 of their 400 employees come down with COVID, and a lot of deaths. And, you know, we were seeing in some of these factories similar things happening. No one was talking about it, but similar things were happening in the apparel factories that were happening in the meat packing factories. And so, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, we try to keep an eye on, you know, with anyone that we're working with. And, you know, I was saying in the beginning, like, why is it only the executive class that gets to take their computers and go home and work? Every tailor and seamstress I know has their own sewing machine. Let's just let them work from home. But the good news in this stuff, in what Rachel was saying, is that there's two things I'd like to say. Because the consumer is turning away from retail, which is, you know, terrible for our industry. It's been terrible for the retail workers. We've seen so many store closures. But for the designers, business to consumer selling, direct selling, is such bigger margins. So what are you going to do with those margins? You know, like, are you going to take those margins and just give them to an investor, or, you know, give them to your profits, or are you going to invest in a cleaner supply chain? You know, so there you have a little bit of margins to work with there. And then the other thing is that, you know, I do believe the good news in this is that if, you know, these smaller designers that were, you know, I mean, and by smaller, I mean, you're not LVH and like these giant corporations, they're going to be able to build this from the ground up correctly to begin with. I think that it's going to be, you know, Rachel's talked a lot about this, about it's going to be a lot harder for these giant ships to turn around, you know. And you know, that's going to be really difficult. But for the designers that are coming up today, the kind of people that I think are probably attending this talk, you can start from the ground up a little bit more easily than, and I think it's going to be a selling point.
And I think what both of you just brought up was the whole idea of I think, Rachel, you said this at the beginning in terms of the whole idea of repair, reuse, upcycle. Don't produce anymore because we have enough in the world if we manage the global inventory of apparel properly, right?
Right.
In terms of looking at it that way. Shannon, what you just said about the fact that like from the tailors and the skilled workforce that's already out there, and a dispersed workforce that can work from home. Again, this is not just the executive class, like you said, that gets to work from home. So if we were to pull those things together, this really says something about the emerging brands and the smaller brands that are more nimble to be able to lead this change, rather than the larger brands that we see talking about this, but not being able to implement some of the transparency and the change to their process, because it takes much longer to make changes at that scale. And I think that's sort of the topics that we're touching on here. Hey, just being mindful of time here in terms of our audience, we do have a couple of questions here. And so as we prepare to wrap, there was a question from one of our audience members asking about what's the most accurate way to go about becoming getting some sort of a certification, becoming a certified sustainable business. The first thing that comes to mind for me is being, pursuing some sort of a B Corp certification. How about from both of your standpoints, if you could touch on how to become a certified sustainable business?
I mean, I think that, I've been involved with B Corps. I think that's one way to go about it. I don't think it necessarily means you're sustainable. There's lots of ways that they measure, being a B Corp in terms of social impact. Comes at a price. There's also the Higg Index, which is interesting and one of the biggest, but a little fraught. I think they're dealing with some of their own internal issues right now. I think the problem is there isn't one standard. And as we know, like, standards aren't the be all end all. I think that also you can look into, I think like GOTS certified, I think you need to look into your supply chain and get certifications at different levels of your supply chain. I think that's a very responsible way of, instead of just, I think B Corp is great for overarching, and they would probably require you, especially as an apparel business, maybe get some of those other sort of supply chain certifications. But there's no one. Shannon and I have talked about, what if we started, certifying or figuring out a way to become a certification body. I don't know if that's the route we'll go. There's a lot of science behind getting certified in any part of the supply chain. And I think that, there needs to be more like third-party audits, like true unrelated fashion industry auditing of the fashion supply chain. And I think that's where the Higg Index and some others have come up against some scrutiny, because I think they are in part funded by the fashion industry and parts of the textile industry.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in terms of like hemp certification and how that could happen. I mean, if you're gonna certify a commodity, it sort of behooves you to look outside your industry to people who don't have an interest in it to really get certified. And I think that's where the fashion industry has gone wrong. But I think that, it's my incomplete answer.
I would add that, like, maybe certification isn't necessarily what you need. You need credibility in what you're offering the consumer. I'm drawing a complete blank on, I'm sorry, on a designer I saw recently. Maybe Rachel will remember it. But she shows pictures of who is making her stuff, you know, in while it's being made, you know, and then, you know, offering an actual, you know, an actual repair or buyback, offering, you know, where are you getting your fabrics from? What are they certified? Where, you know, listing out exactly incredible ways what you're doing, instead of just kind of saying, you know, we're sustainable, you know, actually list it out what you're doing. I mean, that, like the Patagonia example was a great example. You know, they're saying exactly what they're doing, and that, I think that you would get more credibility from that than just some certification that a consumer has never even seen. You know, who outside of this industry knows what the Higg index is?
Right. Right. Yeah. Hopefully not many. I mean, I mean, otherwise they'd be real nerdy. I think that's a good point, and I think there's a larger issue in the fashion industry. Is it's historically sold itself on privacy and non-transparency, because you want to give the illusion of scarcity and that the product sort of magically appears in this beautiful way on a model, and that's how you sell it. And so, like, opening up the innards and showing it to people is foreign, one, and two, the industry thinks that they're giving away the secret sauce in ways that they're really not, because everybody can figure it out who wants to. And so I think there's an internal marketing process of this between sustainability departments in large organizations and maybe like the CFO in terms of being like, no, we need to open this up, and we need to share knowledge, and we need to work together, and otherwise we're not going to get done what we promised we were going to get done by 2023. You know?
Right.
It reminds me of the same conversation that companies have about diversity. You know, it's a similar thing where let's all, you know, attend a seminar about how to be more diverse and more sensitive. But what is the actual, you know, what is your actual workforce look like? What does your, you know, executive class look like? What, you know, so it's kind of a similar thing. And you know, so I think if you are designing your products in a way that really is actually sustainable and actually ethical, then it should be part of your sales campaign. You know, like you can teach, this is how we teach the consumer, this is how we change the society, you know. And
Perfect.
I think people can see through it, you know. I think the consumer will see through it if it's full of bull, you know. Hopefully.
And we've seen some of that, you know, recently in the media. So hey, just as you know, so as we try to wrap up here in terms of, you know, some of the consumers and some of the audience members here, you know, we do have a fair number of folks from the various design schools that are going to be either watching the recordings of this because of their time zones, because we have a lot of our attendees that have signed up are going to be from various countries in Europe, as well as in Africa, and then in Central and South America. So with that in mind, as a parting thought here, last topic for us to cover is that for a recent undergrad or a graduate design program student coming into the industry, what would be a thought that you would share with them? And then for anybody that is mid-career or early to mid-career, and they're looking at hey, I need to make a change here because I'm drawn to this and I'd like to get more involved. What would be your parting thoughts from both of your perspectives on new design students or mid-career design professionals that might want to make a pivot?
Well, for both, I'm sorry. The industry is not doing well right now, and it hasn't been for a while. And I graduated from Parsons from fashion design school in 2010 during the recession, you know, and it was tough. And so what I did is I created a business in a place the fashion supply chain that I thought was missing, which was an e-commerce store, direct to consumer of, sustainable fashion that was designed forward. I think that I think for mid-career professionals, if you've been in the industry a while and you're still employed, lucky you. I think that there's a lot to be done within organizations, and I think a lot of organizations are looking for leadership. But I would go to as many people as you can who, like I said, are working in cottage industries in and around sustainability, like myself and others, for a while, and get there. I'm hired as a consultant to companies for that reason, because they understand that there are people who are outside of having worked in corporate fashion, that can help them usher their company along, and introduce them to new ways of working. And for new graduates, I would say that learn as much as you can about what's been done over the past 10-20 years, and where the industry is right now. Educate yourself as much as possible if you want to work in a corporate environment. I think there's a lot of sustainability positions, but there's also a lot to be done even in positions that don't say sustainability. You don't need a position that says sustainability assistant or manager or director to work your way into that. I think that and then if you want to start your own business, now is the best time. There is only room for innovation. This is a nascent, especially in terms of recycling and circular business models. This is absolutely nascent. We are on the ground floor. Who isn't to say that you have the best idea? You're the next, you're the next Amazon, but way better and, ethical and sustainable. Who's to say that you aren't that person to do that? No one is there, especially in the, sustainability space, because it just is very, very new. As much as we talk about it, it's not really off the ground yet. So.
I guess the only thing that I would add, Rachel pretty much covered everything. The only thing I would add is that, we do, I know we are probably being watched mostly by designers, but we do in this industry put a lot of the focus completely on designers. And I would say, to also give some focus to the actual garment workers. That, if you are a young designer, there is a lot of innovation that you could get just from being more involved with the actual garment worker. Anybody who's worked closely with a pattern maker will know, how much they can change your style into something workable. And then, and then the actual person making the clothes, that's the only thing I would love to see change a little bit in our society as a whole, is to kind of pay a little bit more attention to the actual people that are doing the work and making our entire economy work, So that's the only thing I would
the technical skills to bring designs to life, right? That's, a little more emphasis and acknowledgement on that front, because that is an area that the shutdown has completely shown, is our ability to make things for ourselves. So, hey, with that, I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up this session. And thanks to both Shannon and Rachel for sharing their thoughts on the whole sustainable manufacturing processes. And for anybody in the audience, there's a ton of information available through their website in terms of Skilled Laborers Brigade. And we'll have that information shared on the exhibitor site for their links and for the information that they're sharing about this process. So thanks everyone for attending. Shannon, Rachel, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and being part of this. And we'll look forward to connecting back on some future discussions. We do have a little social hour at 5 o'clock Pacific time today. And so hopefully we'll see some of the attendees there. And thanks again for attending today.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for your thoughtful questions.
Bye.